Good evening and welcome to another edition of Jay's Retro Toys and Games for Wednesday, October 5th, 2022. It's episode 30, and tonight we're looking at a great game that's been around for quite some time. In fact, it came out in 1981 and is celebrating almost over 40 years, actually, 41 years to the date. And it was a World War II strategy board game. The first version was initially published in 1981, and the second edition, known colloquially as its counterpart Classic, that was published 3 years later in 84. It's played on a board depicting a spring 1942 political map of Earth, divided by territories, and the players take the role of one or more of the five major belligerents of World War II. More than 10 spin-off games have since been produced, and some of these editions are revised versions of the classic game, while others depict a specific theater, campaign, or battle of World War II. Designed by Larry Harris 41 years ago to the date, we're looking at the classic game Axis and Allies tonight on Jay's Retro Toys and Games. All right, welcome everybody to the show. And that's everybody out there in the internet watching us, listening to us on Anchor and Spotify, and of course our YouTube channel. We thank you very much for that continued support of it. Tonight we're looking at Axis and Allies, the game that's been around for 41 years, designed by Larry Harris, and this basically is a strategy board game. The first one we're going to be looking at tonight, and then on Friday we're going to be looking at Stratego, which is like the counterpart to Axis and Allies, and we got a good 2 days worth of games here to look at, so we're going to look at them right now. So Axis and Allies was designed by Larry Harris under the prototype name 1942 in the late 70s. Harris partnered with a local Connecticut hobby shop, Citadel Game Store, to publish Axis and Allies in 1981 under the company name of Nova Game Designs, and with the name originating from Pat Flory, who was the owner of the shop. Now, the game was republished by the Milton Bradley Company in 84 as part of the Game Master series of board games. Now, this edition has been retroactively named Axis and Allies Classic to differentiate it from later revisions. Then in 96, Axis and Allies Classic was inducted into the Academy of Adventure Gaming Arts and Design, the Adventure Gaming Hall of Fame. Now, Games Magazine has also inducted Axis and Allies into their Buyer's Guide Hall of Fame, an honor the magazine extends to games that have met or exceeded the highest standards of quality and play value and have been continuously in production for at least 10 years. For example, the classics. And Axis and Allies Classic was the most successful of the 5 Game Master series of board games. Long after the Game Master name was retired, A&A Classic lives on, having been moved to the Avalon Hill lineup following the acquisition of Milton Bradley Company and Avalon Hill by Hasbro. The game itself has gone through several revisions, most recently in 2018, and the object of the game and its spin-offs is to win the war by capturing enough critical territories to gain the advantage over the enemy in a recreation of World War II. After acquiring Milton Bradley and Avalon Hill, Hasbro transformed the Axis and Allies Classic board game from the Milton Bradley division to to the Avalon Hill Division in 1999. And in 1999, Hasbro acquired Wizards of the Coast. In 2004, Hasbro made Avalon Hill a subsidiary of Wizards of the Coast. The Axis and Allies 1981 to the present board game series is currently produced by WOTC under the Avalon Hill label, and Hasbro is the parent company. There are a total of 15 board games in the Axis and Allies series, not counting second editions, 5 of which are currently supported by Avalon Hill. And these are Axis and Allies 1941, the Europe 1940 second edition, Pacific 1940 second edition, the Spring 1942 second edition, and Axis and Allies and Zombies. And many out-of-print A&A board games can be found on various auction websites. In almost every edition of Axis and Allies, players play as the major belligerents of World War II: Germany, Japan, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States. The A&A 50th Anniversary Edition also includes Italy as the third Axis power and China as the fourth Allied power. The A&A Pacific 1940 edition includes China and ANZAC, which is Australia and New Zealand armed forces. The A&A Europe 1940 edition includes Italy and France. The players playing the Axis powers team up against those of the Allied powers, usually in an attempt to conquer key territories represented by regions on the map board. In earlier editions, this was done by capturing and holding until the end of a round of play certain territories where the opposing alliance's capital cities are located. In later editions, this also included other territories on the map where victory cities are located. Certain versions of A&A have their own custom victory conditions. In the original Milton Bradley edition, the classic, the Axis powers could also win by capturing and holding until the end of a round of play enough territories to gain an economic advantage. This economic victory was dropped in later editions of A&A, and in the Pacific one, the Pacific edition, Japan gains a point for every 10 IPCs they collect and can win the game if they collect 22 points. In Axis and Allies D-Day, the Allies need to control the 3 cities of Cherbourg, Caen, and St. Lo at the end of the 10th round. And in Axis and Allies Guadalcanal, victory is achieved by controlling airfields, and in A&A Battle of the Bulge, the Germans need to control territories totaling up to 24 points before round 8. Each round of a game involves each of the powers moving in turn according to a specified order. The game ends when either the Axis powers or the Allied powers complete their objectives. When each power takes its turn, they must first declare how they are to spend the IPCs, that's Industrial Production Certificates, an abstract currency representing 1 million man-hours of labor, in their possession. This may go into buying new units, improving units through research, or repairing damaged structures in later editions. Players then declare any movements made that would result in combat, moving their pieces as appropriate, and after resolving combat, declaring any non-combat movements. Now, at the end of the turn, players then place any units that were purchased at the beginning of the turn and collect IPCs based on all territories that they control at the end of the turn. Combat is typically divided into several types, and in all types, however, combat is divided into rounds. And in each round, attackers and defenders roll dice to determine which of their units deal hits on the opposing side. If the number rolled is less than or equal to the unit's attack or defense rating, where appropriate, the unit scores a hit on an opposing unit of the opponent's choosing. During the round, if an attacker defeats an enemy, the enemy can do a final retaliation before death, then be taken off the board. And some types of combat, such as strategic bombing raids, naval bombardment, and anti-aircraft defense, last only one round. though in others, the attacker has the option of either continuing with another round of battle or retreating. Combat is fully resolved when either side loses all their units or the attackers choose to retreat. And though combat in different territories may be resolved in any order of the attacker's choosing, combat in one territory may affect the number of combatants in another territory for later battles, as in the case of an amphibious attack or assault, or when attacking units withdraw. Due to the success of Axis and Allies Classic as of 2021, there are 13 spin-off games in the A&A franchise using more or less the same mechanics. 4 are updated or expanded versions of the original global A&A Classic game. An additional 4 games are theater games depicting combat in Europe or the Pacific. 3 games are local games of specific battles, and 1 game takes place at the beginning of World War I and features a global theater with the addition of a zombie apocalypse. Additional games have also been published by other game designers with similar mechanics, some requiring components from an A&A or similar game. In 1999, A&A Europe was released with slightly updated rules and focus on the European theater of World War II. This was followed in 2001 by A&A Pacific with similar rules and focus shifted to the Pacific theater. A&A D-Day of 2004 focused on the Allied liberation of France, and in 2004 the first major revision to the core game Axis and Allies Revised was released, with elements taken from A&A Europe and Pacific, also celebrating the 20th anniversary of Axis and Allies itself. The Battle of the Bulge focused on the Battle of the Bulge in Europe, while Guadalcanal focused on the Solomon Islands campaign in the Pacific. In 2008, the 50th anniversary edition was released as one of the 3 games celebrating the 50th anniversary of its publisher, Avalon Hill. The other 2 games were Acquire and Diplomacy, and this was followed by the A&A 1942 version in 2009, and the second major revision to the core game with mechanics taken from the anniversary edition, also celebrating the 25th anniversary of A&A itself. A&A Pacific 1940 was released in December of 2009, and the European 1940 version was released in August of 2010. These games can be combined to form a global game of World War II on a 175 by 80 centimeter map, or a 70 by 32. All 9 major powers of World War II, China, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the Soviet Union, the UK, the United States, and the Anzac forces, are represented in the combined global game with unique units and colors. To streamline the game and correct balance issues, Global 1940 was revised and a new rule set was released on the A&A forums in January of 2011, later released as a second edition. In 2012, Axis and Allies 1941 was released, containing a simplified map and rules to make it easier for beginners. In 2013, A&A 1914 was released, being the only non-World War II centered A&A game. The most recent A&A game came out in October of 2018, called Axis and Allies and Zombies, being an ahistorical version. Axis and Allies is not a strict historical war game due to its streamlining for ease of play and balancing so that both sides have a chance to win. For instance, the economic model is simplistic, with each territory producing a number of industrial production certificates for the purchase of new units. For example, in the original classic version, the game is supposed to start in the spring of 1942, but Japan is immediately in position to attack Hawaii again, and while Germany is pressed well into the Soviet Union with an initially superior force, if the game were truer to history, the Axis empires would be at their climax in 1942, about to be pushed back by the Allies. Gives you all the different versions that we just talked about. The units, you can look at those. Scroll it down. And now we go into some revisions. And the revisions would follow shortly after the game release, as the rules didn't always produce results which made sense in the context of the historical setting. For example, the abstraction of submarines fighting airplanes initially had a restriction that the bomber was the only kind that could attack a sub, and this was later revised so that all aircraft could attack submarines. Although not the very first edition, the Milton Bradley release was the first to establish the well-known game mechanics. And there were 3 versions of the rules for the Milton Bradley games, though only the first 2 were included with the game itself. The 3rd edition rules were exclusive to a computer video game, Axis and Allies by Hasbro, released in 1998, and the Iron Blitz, with minor additional rules, released in 1999. The 3 editions differed by minor details, and there is also a newer video game, A&A RTS, released in 2004, which was a departure from the original A&A Classic World map and introducing several tactical battle scenarios. The Axis and Allies RTS was followed by A&A RTS Collector's Edition in 2006, with expanded strategy guide included. The first major revision to the rules was designed by Larry Harris and Mike Selinker, who would later develop the board game Attack based on the experiences learned working with Harris, who tried to address many of the Milton Bradley version's shortcomings, including removing the Axis economic victory condition and the requirement of capturing enemy capitals in favor of victory cities, which has been used in every revision since. And with victory cities, the Axis and Allies start with an equal number of victory cities, specially labeled territories, and strive to capture enough victory cities to gain a majority of them, the size of the majority being agreed upon by the players prior to the game. This allows players to play shorter or longer games depending upon the number of victory cities a power must control in order to claim victory. And with each revision, there was also balance changes in order to make gameplay more dynamic. In the Milton Bradley edition, infantry were cheap units that tended to be most useful as defensive cannon fodder due to their token attack and slightly better defense. This had led to many areas of the game board being heavily fortified, bogging gameplay down to a matter of who could build more infantry faster. To counter this, the tank, whose defensibility was equal to infantry in the Milton Bradley release, had its defensive capabilities improved in the revised edition, so as to encourage players to use combined arms. Other balance changes included altering the cost of the various units and altering the transport capacity. In the Milton Bradley edition, transports could carry only 2 infantry or 1 of any other land unit, and later revisions had transports able to carry 1 infantry in addition to 1 of any other land unit. The variety of land and sea units was increased by introducing artillery and destroyers from A&A Europe and Pacific to A&A the Revised Edition. Artillery increased the effectiveness of infantry in attacks, and while destroyers limited the usefulness of submarines and acted as a lower-cost substitute for the expensive battleship, cruisers were introduced in the 50th Anniversary Edition to effectively split the destroyers' many abilities. And while destroyers continued to limit the usefulness of submarines, the stronger cruisers now act as lower-cost battleships. The game board itself was also reworked in each revision. The Milton Bradley Classic release featured largely vibrant colors, while the revised version featured mainly darker tones. The 50th Anniversary Edition and 1942 edition has a more realistic terrain with only subtle hints of color to denote which power has initial control over a particular territory. The composition of territories was also slightly altered. For example, the number of territories between Berlin and Moscow had been increased for the revised edition, including adding many Soviet territories or strategic importance. Strategic bombing was altered over the years until the revised edition. Strategic bombing caused opposing players to lose the IPCs they had on hand, and the 50th anniversary edition changed this so that industrial complexes were damaged instead. Damaged industrial complexes had less capacity to produce units and can be repaired at the cost of IPCs. Later revisions have also included changes in research, which was generally not a worthwhile investment in the Milton Bradley edition due to its high cost and low probability of success, to have more of an effect with mixed results. The 1942 edition eliminates research altogether. And another feature that was implemented but was later dropped was the revised edition's national advantages, which represented tactics and technologies used by a specific power during the war. For example, a British ability allowed the British player to delay their combat movement until the American player's turn once per game in order to have a coordinated attack. Later editions had minor cosmetic changes in the playing pieces, and in the Milton Bradley version, only the infantry pieces were unique to each power in appearance. Unique units was later expanded to include nearly every unit in later editions. And compared to the generic fighters of the Milton Bradley release, the Supermarine Spitfire was used in later editions to represent British fighters. The Mitsubishi A6M0 was used to represent Japanese fighters, while two different fighters, the Grumman F4F Wildcat and the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, represented American fighters. The color scheme to associate units with powers was also standardized across all Axis and Allies series games based on the colors used in A&A Europe, Pacific, and is different from those used in the Milton Bradley release. In 2009, an updated version of A&A Pacific was released, titled Axis and Allies Pacific 1940. The 10th board game in the A&A series, A and AP 1940, introduced the Anzac forces as a playable power, along with two new unit types, mechanized infantry and tactical bombers. The 2010 had an updated version of A&A Europe that was released, titled Axis and Allies Europe 1940, and A&AE 1940 introduced France as a playable power. Mechanized infantry and tactical bomber units continue to appear after debuting in A&A Pack 40. Italy also appears as a playable power in A&AE 1940 after debuting in A&A 50. And in 1940, the AP 1940 aircraft carriers and battleships are capital ships that are damaged with one hit and sunk with two hits. Damaged CVS and BBs can be repaired by moving the damaged CV or BB to a friendly naval base for repairs. Special rules apply for fighters and tactical bombers if a CV is damaged. A&AE 1940 is the 11th A&A board game in the series. Axis and Allies East, or E, 1940, and A&AP 1940 are designed to be played as separate games or maybe combined into one game to create a 2 to 6 player global 1940 scenario, complete with separate setup and national objectives. The combined AE and AP 1940 maps measure 175 by 80. All 9 major powers of World War II are represented with unique unit pieces and their own color. Now, in addition to the board games, Larry Harris had also designed the Europe and the Pacific, which had the core mechanics of A&A adapted for a specific theater. This, in turn, served as the catalyst for the revised edition. And although there were preliminary plans for a variant that allowed players to combine Europe and Pacific together, it had never been published. And Larry Harris has announced 2 completely new editions. the Pacific 1940 released in December of 2009, and the Europe 1940 released in the summer of 2010, which will also include a variant that combines both games together. Other Harris Design A&A games were more tactical in nature and focused on individual battles in specified small areas, like D-Day, that focused on the Allied liberation of France, the Battle of the Bulge focused on the Battle of the Bulge, and while Guadalcanal focused on the Solomon Islands campaign. And through these games, they retained many of the traditional mechanics. Some were specific to that particular game. Warren Spector reviewed the 1984 Milton Bradley version of A&A in Space Gamer number 72. He commented that overall, Axis and Allies is a winner. It's simple to learn, easy to play, requires lots of thought, and has immense replay value since each country has unique goals, resources, and geography. And A&A was declared the best-selling physical war game in August of '96, having eclipsed the 275,000 copies sold by Panzerblitz, the second highest seller in the genre. It went on to sell through 1 million copies by 1998. 2 video games based on the official board game were released in 98 and 04. Axis and Allies by Hasbro was released in 98, and it features a departure from the original classic world map and introduces several tactical battlefield scenarios. Iron Blitz, released as an updated version in 99 with minor additional rules, and features Marines, paratroopers, destroyers, and kamikazes. RTS by Timegate Studios, released in 2004, and is primarily based on real-time strategy gameplay. The RTS Collector's Edition, released as an expanded version in 2006, the game became Timegate's best-selling game. And then in 2008, Wizards of the Coast created an online version of A&A as part of their GleeMax game site. When GleeMax was canceled, the game found its way to the Game Table online game site, who programmed the game for Wizards of the Coast. The initial version was based on the 2004 revised edition. September of 2010, Game Table Online has developed a new version based on the A&A 1942 set. And unfortunately, Game Table Online is no longer available as it shut down in 2015. A&A and many different variants can currently be played via the AAA website. Then AAA is an open source adaptation of Axis and Allies available for Windows, Mac, and Linux operating systems. It allows users to play single player against an AI or hot seat against other friends in the same room, and it allows multiplayer on and in online lobby and also over email and network connections. Originally released in 2002, AAA is now on stable version 2.2 as of the year 2020. Version 2.2 is able to play the major versions of A&A, the Classic, the Revised, and the 50th Anniversary Edition, and also the Spring of 1942 edition. It also hosts many fan-created maps which have similar rules to A&A, but use a different setup or a different map or area or era altogether. For example, historic scenarios like a map based on Napoleon's conquest, sci-fi maps, and fantasy maps. Then in 2019, Axis and Allies 1942 Online was published by Beamdog. 2005, The Miniatures was released as the series' first foray into miniature gaming. This was followed up by Axis and Allies Naval Miniatures War at Sea, with the Air Force Miniatures Angels 20 being released in October of 2011. There have been several additional A&A miniatures booster releases. Currently, there are 20 countries represented in Axis and Ally miniatures. And there you have it, friends. A look at Axis and Allies, the 41-year history of a game that is going back farther and farther. So, in this case, we have spanned the 41-year history. And it looks like Axis and Allies can be played at any given time, no matter if it's the old rules or the new rules. It's a very versatile game, one that I hope by reading it to you, those who knew how to play the game and still know how to play it, understand what I was talking about, because I was totally clueless because I never played the game. There you have it, friends. Axis and Allies, tonight's episode 30 of Jay's Retro Toys and Games. Coming up on Friday's edition, my birthday, we'll be looking at the other game that's a strategy board game that is like the counterpart to Axis and Allies. We'll be looking at Stratego, the strategy board game for 2 players on a board of 10 by 10 squares, controlling 40 pieces representing individual officer and soldier ranks in an army. The game goes back as far as 1946. And it can be played from 15 minutes to 2 hours. Its age range is 8 and up. And Axis and Allies age range was a medium one, playing 2 to 10 plus hours. And didn't say what the oh, wait a minute, let me see. Hold on a minute, because sometimes you can get the if you zoom in, you can see it. I'll just try this again here. Let me see if I can up it. What are you doing? Oh, it's you can't. Sometimes you can see it. Looks like it was a game that was probably for 10 or higher. That's why I didn't play it as much as I did. So, all right. Hope you had a great time with this edition, episode 30. And we thank you very much again for your continued support of Jay's Retro Toys and Games on Anchor, Spotify, and YouTube. And don't forget to not only join the Facebook group pages that cover all of this, but do share your memories of all of what we've covered so far in the 30 episodes of this series of Retro Toys and Games. I'm Jason DiCanio. Remember, be honest, be real, and keep it simple, stupid. Yes. We will see you on Friday for the birthday edition of Jay's Retro Toys and Games. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Don't forget to subscribe to the Democratizing Network for great more content like this one.